Hello from Canada. And I want to start with a hearty congratulations to both the undergraduate and graduate recipients of this year's Faculty of Law Achiever Awards. I salute your outstanding academic accomplishments. One of my favorite quotes comes from the great Nelson Mandela, and that is, education is the most powerful weapon that you can use to change the world. And changing the world is something that lawyers are uniquely equipped to do with our legal education and skills. A story of transformative change that I have always found inspiring is the story of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored Peoples, an organization formed in 1909 to work on achieving equality for Black Americans. In 1929, the NAACP developed a 25-year plan for a campaign focused on achieving the constitutional right to equal education. They advocated and litigated, losing many cases but never giving up. One of their lawyers was Thurgood Marshall, the first African American Supreme Court justice. Amazingly, in 1954, the 25th year of their strategy, lawyers from the NAACP won the landmark case of Brown versus Board of Education at the United States Supreme Court. The court rejected the separate but equal doctrine and ruled that segregated schools violated the constitutional right to equality. This judgment was a massive step towards justice and a catalyst for the achievements of the civil rights movement in the 1960s and beyond. And Nelson Mandela University's Faculty of Law has such a clear and compelling mandate to empower society to fulfill South Africa's constitutional goals through legal education, research, and engagement. I'm a scholar of comparative constitutional law, and South Africa has one of the most beautiful and inspiring constitutions in the world. Constitutions are vital legal instruments because they are the highest and strongest form of law in every country on earth. Constitutions also have immense cultural value. In fact, it was a South African judge who wrote that a constitution is like a mirror of a country's soul. Back in the 1990s, when Nelson Mandela and his colleagues were drafting the post-apartheid constitution, a leading academic expert from the United States warned against including social, economic, cultural, and environmental rights in the new constitution. His argument that these rights would be difficult to fulfill and that difficulty could undermine confidence in the fledgling democracy. But Nelson Mandela dismissed these concerns, insisting on a constitution that reflected his vision of a free, egalitarian, and sustainable nation. Of course, there are still many troubling gaps between the beautiful words of the South African Constitution and the reality of day-to-day life for millions of South Africans. Progress has been made, but much remains for you to do. At the World Summit on Sustainable Development in Johannesburg in 2002, Nelson Mandela said that one of the accomplishments he was most proud of was that millions of South Africans had gained access to safe drinking water, a constitutional right in South Africa. Now, that is progress on an issue many of us take for granted, yet much more remains to be done. The glass is only half full. Speaking of drinking water, I'd like to share a story from Canada that may surprise you. It's a story about the power of legal education, research, and engagement leading to justice. 15 years ago, I was writing a report about threats to safe drinking water in Canada from contaminants from agriculture, industry, and other pollution sources, as well as the weakness of Canada's rules to protect water quality. In the course of doing my research, I learned that many Indigenous communities in Canada were suffering from long-term drinking water advisories. These are formal warnings that the water in a community is not safe to drink. As I dug deeper, I was horrified to learn that there were more than 150 Indigenous communities in this unacceptable situation, which in many cases had dragged on for decades and decades. In one community, the Garden Lake First Nation, a majority of the 10,000 residents had neither running water nor toilets in their homes in Canada. And during the Canadian winter, they were forced to chop holes in the ice on the lake in order to fill buckets with water. Rates of waterborne disease were far higher among Indigenous people than other Canadians, and my sense of justice was deeply offended. So I wrote a blistering article for a law journal called No Taps, No Toilets First Nations and the constitutional right to water in Canada, arguing that government inaction on this critical issue violated several constitutional rights of Indigenous people, and that the federal government had a clear legal obligation to remedy this untenable situation. The issue began to attract media attention. I was interviewed by a number of reporters, and then lawyers began reaching out to me with questions, practicing lawyers. In 2015, a new government was elected and promised to eliminate all of the drinking water advisories. In 2019, a class action lawsuit was filed, relying on the legal arguments identified in my article. And in 2021, a shocking settlement agreement was announced. The federal government apologized, committed to pay $2 billion in compensation to members of affected Indigenous communities, and agreed to invest $6 billion to upgrade infrastructure and provide training to Indigenous people to operate and maintain the new and improved drinking water and wastewater treatment facilities. This is one of the largest class action settlements in Canadian history. As of today, 147 long-term boil water advisories have been ended, and fewer than 35 remain. These should all be addressed by 2030, marking a major step forward for justice and sustainability in Canada. Legal education, legal research, legal action. I also had the tremendous privilege of serving as the UN Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and the Environment from 2018 to 2024. Special rapporteurs are independent human rights experts who volunteer to report to the General Assembly and the Human Rights Council, to educate the public about human rights, to publish reports, conduct country visits, and generally act as human rights advocates. My first report to the Human Rights Council was about the devastating toll of air pollution on human health, human rights, and the environment, because breathing polluted air kills more than 8 million people every year. This is a staggering number that is truly hard to comprehend. I learned that special rapporteurs can also file amicus curiae, or friend of the court briefs, in important lawsuits related to our mandates. And the first case I became involved in was a South African lawsuit based on the right to a healthy environment in Article 24 of the South African Constitution. This case was brought by two civil society organizations, the Groundwork Trust and Vukani Environmental Justice Alliance, challenging the government's failure to take action to improve air quality in the heavily polluted Mpumalanga region. Thanks to assistance from Lawyers for Human Rights, I was able to submit an amicus brief setting forth the government's legal constitutional obligations to improve air quality. The court not only welcomed my participation, but relied extensively on my submissions in writing its judgment. The court concluded that the government's failure to act to reduce air pollution violated the constitutional right to a healthy environment and ordered the government to take specific actions to improve air quality within a maximum of 12 months. I was also invited by the government of Botswana to conduct a country visit, which I did in 2023. Botswana is a leader in nature conservation, but faces challenges related to pollution, waste management, and access to water. I visited a small indigenous community called Kuke in the Kalahari Desert that only had 2 boreholes for more than 1,500 people. So I saw long lineups, mainly women and girls, waiting for water under the blistering sun. In my end of mission report, I urged the government to take action to fulfill the rights of the people of Kuke. By the time I presented my report on my Botswana mission to the Human Rights Council a few months later, the government had drilled 4 additional boreholes in Kuke. Again, progress towards justice. And my final story today that I'd like to share with you is how young people can use their legal education to help transform the world. Back in 2019, some law students from the University of South Pacific reached out to me about an idea they were really excited about after taking a course on international environmental law. As Pacific Islanders, they were deeply concerned about the lack of progress in tackling the climate crisis, a crisis threatening their lives, their communities, and the very future of the countries where they lived. And their idea was to take the world's biggest problem to the world's highest court, to seek an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice about states' legal obligations to take climate action and the legal the legal consequences of violating those obligations. To get an advisory opinion requires a United Nations General Assembly resolution. So the students formed an organization called Pacific Island Students Fighting Climate Change and started a global campaign. By 2021, they had one country supporting them, Vanuatu. By 2022, they had about a dozen states lined up behind them. And in 2023, they surprised everyone by getting a resolution adopted by consensus at the UN General Assembly. The resolution asked two questions. What are the legal obligations of states to address the climate crisis? And what are the consequences of breaching those obligations? In 2024, the advisory opinion proceeding at the International Court set a record for the highest number of states ever involved, with close to 100, as well as a dozen international organizations. The hearings took place in The Hague last December, and some of those former law students from the University of South Pacific, now graduates, made submissions to the 15 judges of the ICJ. Can you imagine? Later this year, the court will issue its advisory opinion, likely serving as a catalyst for accelerated climate action and accountability. It's an incredible and inspiring story about the power of law students. All of my stories today are about employing legal education, legal research, and legal action in pursuit of a better world. So let me conclude by reiterating my congratulations to the recipients of the Faculty of Law Achiever Awards. While you will have a diverse variety of careers after graduating, I hope that all of you will use the education and skills gained at Nelson Mandela University to pursue the inspiring vision of justice, equality, and sustainability that is embodied in the Constitution of South Africa. Thank you, Nkosi Kakulu, Gia Bonga, and good day from Canada.